8 p.m., December 20th, 1968, Vallejo, California. 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen answers the door to her date, 17-year-old David Arthur Faraday. Both are good kids, high achievers in their high schools, and the sort of children any parent would be proud of. They're not above a bit of teenage mischief, though. They tell Betty's parents they're going to a carol concert at Betty's high school, but after hopping in the car, they head to a local drive-in, grab a soda, and drive away from the town. About 9 p.m., they pull over on Lake Herman Road on the outskirts of Vallejo, where they remain for the next 2 hours. The spot is a popular lover's lane where young couples go to get time alone. Several vehicles drive past that night and spot the young couple laughing, talking, and relaxing in the car. At about 11:05 p.m., a new vehicle arrives. It pulls up alongside David and Betty, and the driver gets out. Suddenly, they're blinded by a flashlight, then gunshots. Multiple shots hit the car as the newly arrived driver moves around the side of the vehicle while opening fire with a pistol. Betty manages to open the car door to flee, but just as she scrambles outside, the gunman places his pistol at the side of David's head and fires again. Betty runs, but the killer's flashlight follows her, and 6 more shots ring out. 5 hit her square in the back. She falls to the ground in agony. As she lies there, she can only watch as the gunman calmly and silently returns to his vehicle and drives away into the night. As she lay on the ground bleeding, Betty had no idea that she was a victim in the opening act of one of America's most legendary murder sagas. The Zodiac Killer had claimed his first victims. Betty Lou Jensen and David Arthur Faraday were discovered by a passing motorist only minutes after the attack. However, both died of their injuries before midnight. The senseless murder of 2 upstanding teenagers shocked the quiet town of Vallejo. Police had no valuable leads and no suspects. The teenagers had not been violated or robbed, and they had no enemies to speak of. It appeared that a stranger had decided to murder 2 kids for the sake of the violence. The trail quickly grew cold, and life in Vallejo carried on. 6 months later, on the night of July 4th, 1969, with the murders of Betty and David now being put into memory, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau met up and drove to the quiet Blue Rock Springs Park just outside of Vallejo. As they drove, Mageau thought he spotted a car following them. Deciding to ignore it, they continued on, but the vehicle followed them all the way to Blue Rock Springs Park outside the city. After stopping for a moment and turning off the headlights, the other vehicle started back up again and drove away. 5 minutes later, Mageau and Darlene were interrupted by the sound of a car again. It pulled up a short distance from them and the driver got out, immediately shining a blinding flashlight in their direction. Darlene and Mageau assumed it must have been the police checking on a lone car in the middle of the night, so they started reaching for their IDs. But then, out of nowhere, a gunfire. No warning, no time to react. Bullets tore through the car, hitting them both over and over. Mageau was hit in the arm, neck, and leg, while Darlene slumped over the steering wheel. The gunman turned to leave, only for Mageau to cry out in pain. The gunman turned back to fire 2 more shots into Mageau and several into Darlene. This time, Mageau stayed quiet. Locals had heard the shots and the police were on the scene within 15 minutes, but the shooter was long gone. At around 12:40 that night, Vallejo police dispatcher Nancy Slover picked up the phone for what should have been a typical call. As she tried to ask what was wrong, she was overpowered by a calm, mature-sounding voice.
I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye.
Before Slover could interrogate him, the caller hung up. The Vallejo Police Department now knew they had a serial killer on their hands. Both attacks were similar. A lone gunman attacking an isolated couple in their car at night. The man was always shot first, but the woman shot more times. Fear of men, perhaps? And a hatred of women? Darlene was pronounced dead at almost the same time as the mysterious call came in, but Mageau miraculously survived. More importantly, he was able to provide a description of his attack.
I saw a white man, maybe 5'8". I'd say he was about 200 pounds, with short curly brown hair. It was dark and I was scared, so I couldn't see much else.
Investigators now had a description and a pattern of behavior to work from. The killer must have been shocked to learn of Mago's survival. From his phone call, he'd clearly believed he'd killed both victims. No doubt the killer spent those first few days paranoid, but as time went on, he realized that police had no clear leads on him. This must have thrilled him. If one personality trait is obvious in the tale of the Zodiac Killer, it is arrogance. The killer relished in his sense of superiority to the police and wanted to feel like he was smarter than them. He wanted to gloat about the fact they couldn't catch him. It is this frightening ego that led to a mysterious letter finding its way into the mailroom of the San Francisco Chronicle on the morning of August 1st, with unnecessary extra postage and a request to please rush to the editor scrawled on the envelope. Inside, the Chronicle's staff made a now infamous discovery. The letter claimed to be from the killer of Darlene, Betty Lou, and David Faraday, and contained an elaborate cipher with a secret message. The author ordered the paper to publish his letter.
If you do not print this cipher, I will go on a kill rampage. I will cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with 12 people over the weekend.
The letter was marked with the killer's signature zodiac symbol, which soon gave him his name. The Chronicle obeyed the Zodiac's wishes and published the letter and cipher for all to see. The public was immediately interested in the dramatic events, and the police hoped that someone might break the cipher and break the case wide open. Donald G. Hardin, a high school teacher from Salinas, and his wife Betty enjoyed a good puzzle and immediately set to work cracking the Zodiac cipher. The cipher proved to be a homophonic substitution. Each letter was swapped out for another symbol. The Hardins' first guess was that certain words were going to appear. Surely someone narcissistic enough to do all of this would begin with I. Taking that first symbol as I, they then looked for kill. Wherever the I substitute was found after a common symbol and before two repeated ones, they assumed it was kill. From there, they looked for other patterns common to English. The most frequent letter in English is E, so that would probably be the most repeated symbol, and tried to guess what a killer like Zodiac might want to say, so they guessed more solutions. It took 2 days of trial and error, but on Monday morning, the police department's phone was ringing. The Hardins had cracked the code. The sadistic message boasted of his skills, claiming that human beings were his favorite thing to hunt as, quote,
"Man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill."
He also claimed that his victims would become his slaves in paradise after death. The Zodiac Killer had revealed himself as a sadistic, probably delusional murderer who craved public attention to stroke his savage ego. His murders and letters had quickly secured his place as California's public enemy #1. But this was just the start of a deadly game, and the world had no idea what was coming next. On September 27, 1969, 20-year-old Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were relaxing on the shores of Lake Berryessa near the town of Napa when Cecilia spotted a man coming towards them. They lost sight of him for a moment, only for Cecilia to suddenly scream. Standing a few feet away was a man wearing a black hood with the Zodiac symbol and a short poncho-like chest covering. Sunglasses beneath the hood hid his eyes. He had a knife in a sheath on his hip, a length of rope, and a pistol pointed at the young couple. Zodiac had already formulated a cover story to get the victims to cooperate. He told them he was an escaped convict from Deer Lodge, Montana, who had already killed a guard and wanted their car to escape to Mexico. To Zodiac's surprise, Brian Hartnell didn't seem intimidated. Instead of cowering, Hartnell engaged him in conversation, offering to help him with money or psychological support. Zodiac spoke with the victims for several minutes in his distinctively calm and mature voice, holstering his gun and giving the appearance of listening. However, Brian's pleas could not turn his mind. The Zodiac produced a length of rope and ordered Cecilia to tie Brian up, which she did. Zodiac retied him after realizing she'd made the knots loose. Clever, but pointless, and then tied her up as well. As the killer drew his knife out of its sheath, the young couple knew their pleading had made no difference. Their fate was sealed. They were going to die here. As the killer approached Cecilia, Brian begged Zodiac to stab him first instead. He couldn't bear to see Cecilia suffer. Zodiac thought about it for a moment. Zodiac stabbed Brian 7 times until he stopped moving. Then he turned his blade upon Cecilia. The killer frantically stabbed her 10 times, attacking multiple parts of her body to inflict more pain. Like in all the other cases, the man was attacked first, but the woman was attacked worse. Satisfied with his monstrous deed, Zodiac left his victims to bleed out by the lakeside. Before he left the scene, he stopped to write a message on Brian Hartnell's car door. It had the date and time, along with the dates of his previous murders. The only words were, as before, members of the public found the victims and notified police, who were on the scene before 7 p.m. Both victims' wounds were grievous, but they were alive when police arrived. Another error on the Zodiac's part. Investigators also found the message left on the car door and knew it was the Zodiac. Always eager to claim his kills, the Zodiac called the Napa Police Department at 7:40 p.m. As it happened in Vallejo, the Zodiac did not listen to the operator and calmly spoke as if reading from a script.
I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Karmann Ghia. I'm the one that did it.
Then he dropped the phone and left it hanging. Cecilia Shepard died of her wounds 2 days later, but not before she was able to give her account of the events. Fortunately, Brian Hartnell survived and gave investigators a detailed account of everything that happened. His description of the Zodiac's calm, mature voice, heavyset build, and estimates of weight and height lined up with those of past witnesses. By now, the pattern of attacks on lone couples in isolated areas was consistent and suggested he had local knowledge. Still, the police had no concrete leads. They could only wait to see when the killer would strike next. They would not have to wait long. October 11th, 1969, 9:40 p.m., downtown San Francisco. 2 weeks after the Berryessa attack, Paul Stein was working his night job as a cab driver to pay his way through his PhD. Money was tight, and he had a wife at home, so he was always looking for an extra fare. When he spotted a heavyset man in dark clothes flagging him down on the sidewalk, he must have counted himself lucky. It was only 15 minutes away. It was an uneventful trip. Not too much conversation was shared between the driver and his passenger. In no time at all, they reached the Presidio Heights area, full of rich houses and quiet roads. He stopped the car under the shade of a tree on the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets. Then, something wrapped around his neck. He wouldn't have had time to scream before a deafening bang turned everything to black. They watched as the strange man rifled through the driver's pockets as his motionless body slumped over into the killer's lap. One of the teens rushed to the phone to dial 911, as the others watched the stranger get out of the car and begin wiping it down. They told the dispatcher about the gunshot and the strange man, and described him as a husky white man, average height, heavy-set build, in dark clothes. Before they were even off the phone, the stranger walked off. A patrol unit from the San Francisco Police Department, SFPD, was already in the area and responded quickly. They had a description of the suspect and were keeping an eye out. As they approached the crime scene, they spotted a husky white man in dark clothes calmly but quickly walking away. They pulled up and the man froze.
Evening, sir. Have you seen anything unusual in the area?
The man was silent for a moment. When he finally replied, his voice was calm and steady.
I think I saw a man waving a gun around up there.
Having gained little from the encounter, the police continued on to the scene, unaware that they had just become the only officers to ever meet the Zodiac face to face. The police dispatcher had misheard the teenagers reporting the crime and told officers the suspect was a dark-skinned male. The SFPD patrol officers did not suspect the suspicious-looking white man fleeing the scene. Had the dispatcher given the correct description, the story of the Zodiac would have ended that night on a quiet street in the Presidio Heights. Instead, the Zodiac walked away from the police just minutes after murdering an innocent man and vanished into the night. At first, the police classed the Stein murder as a robbery gone wrong. They lifted prints from the car but couldn't match them to anyone. Other than some oddly missing chunks from Stein's shirt, there was nothing to separate the killing from the hundreds of other random senseless murders in California every year. A tragedy, but not a unique one. But 3 days later, another letter arrived at the Chronicle's office. The distinctive handwriting, the double postage, the arrogant demand to please rush to the editor told them who it was before they even opened it.
This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street. and Maple Street. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt.
Enclosed with the letter was one of the missing fragments of Stein's shirt, still drenched in his blood.
The SF police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly.
But it was the threat he ended the letter with that truly terrified the police and sent shockwaves of panic through all of California.
School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out.
The police were at a loss. Zodiac was running rings around them, and now he had promised to inflict his worst crime yet. When the letter was published a few days later, it sent California into a panic. Police officers were assigned to guard buses, and parents refused to allow children to go to school without supervision. If the Zodiac's goal was to become the most feared killer in the state, he'd achieved it. All of California was gripped by Zodiac panic. He had to be found before he killed again, but that would soon turn out to be an impossible task. At 2 a.m. on October 22nd, with Zodiac panic at its peak, the phone rang at the Oakland Police Department. A deep voice on the other end announced himself as the Zodiac. He demanded an appearance on the Channel 7 talk show that morning with renowned lawyer Melvin Belli. Desperate for any leads, the police agreed, and Belli was rushed into the talk show. Sure enough, a man identifying himself as Sam called in claiming to be the Zodiac Killer. He called and hung up dozens of times, rambling about headaches and murder intermittently. But the police quickly realized they'd been duped. The call was traced to a hospital for the mentally disturbed in Napa. All three people known to have heard the Zodiac's voice, Brian Hartnell and the two dispatchers at the Vallejo and Napa Police Department, agreed that the voice was not the same. As Zodiac panic spread, false leads, lies, and people manipulating the fear for their own sick thrill became a problem. People claiming to be the Zodiac or knowing his identity became an overwhelming problem for the SFPD as they tried to sort out the fact from the fiction. As it turned out, sorting reality from fiction was becoming a problem for the Zodiac himself, too. 2 letters arrived at the Chronicle's office on the weekend of November 8th and 9th, 1969. The first contained another cipher and a new victim count of 7. The killer placed the murders in December, July, August, September, and October. December, July, September, and October were all accounted for, but the extra 2 victims and an August murder were news to SFPD. There was an unsolved double homicide in San Jose that month, but the Zodiac was never a suspect. Indeed, the real killer in that case was caught in 1971. Codebreakers got to work on the cipher, but found it uncrackable. To this day, it has not been solved. The letter on the 9th doubled down on the 7 kills claim, but again the Zodiac offered no clues as to who those extra kills were. But more concerning were Zodiac's claims of what came next. Zodiac had already proved with the Stein murder that he could do just that. Only his letter had led SFPD to connect the case to him. The rest of the letter was devoted to gloating at his escape from the Stein murder, including his encounter with the 2 officers and plans to make a bomb for a future attack. Events in the next few months supported the idea that something was changing with the Zodiac. He was slipping. Nothing proved this more than a letter which arrived in December 1969, this time to the lawyer Melvin Belli. Handwriting analysis confirmed it was Zodiac, but the tone of the letter was very different. In it, Zodiac pleaded for help. He'd claimed he'd taken an 8th victim, and said he'd take more soon unless someone could help him. The letter was dated December 20th, the 1-year anniversary of the first Vallejo murders. But it is what happened on March 22nd, 1970, that poses some of the strangest questions about Zodiac, and suggests something bizarre was going on with him. That night, Kathy Johns left her home in Southern California for a 500-mile drive to Petaluma to visit her mother. She was 7 months pregnant and had her 10-month-old daughter with her. As she drove along Highway 132 past Modesto, she was flagged down by a stranger who signaled for her to pull over. The stranger informed her that her wheel was loose, but he kindly offered to repair it for her. Kathy thanked him and let the stranger do his work. It only took a few moments, and then the kind stranger bid her farewell and went on his way. However, as Kathy pulled out onto the road again, the entire wheel broke free. The stranger immediately turned back and offered to give her a lift to the nearest gas station, a short distance up the road. Shaken but grateful, Kathy and her daughter hopped into the man's car. Except the man did not stop at the gas station, nor at the next exit. Kathy was quiet at first, but eventually she had to speak up.
Do you always go around helping people on the road like this?
The driver only replied in his chillingly calm voice.
When I get through with them, they don't need any help.
Luckily for Kathy, the abductor made a wrong turn down an off-ramp about 3 hours after picking her up. As he stopped to turn around, Kathy bailed out of the vehicle and ran off the road into an irrigation ditch, still clutching her daughter. The kidnapper rushed out after her, but at that moment a truck arrived and pulled up to see what the commotion was about. The abductor ran back to his car and fled. The relieved Kathy revealed herself to the truck driver and explained what had happened. Another passing driver then took her to the nearest police station, where she filed a report. During the interview, she spotted a wanted poster on the wall and pointed to it.
That's him.
Of course, it was the police sketch of the Zodiac based on Magot and the SFPD officers' descriptions. Police did not initially take Kathy's story seriously, and the media did not report it. As we will see, Kathy was entirely correct. She had survived an encounter with the Zodiac, but how? He had several hours to pull over and kill her without anyone seeing, but he did not. The last letter he'd sent had been the Belli letter, where he'd seemed to be torn in anguish over his murders. So does this explain it? Kathy claimed to see children's clothes in his car, so did Kathy's daughter and pregnancy change his mind? Zodiac had threatened to kill children before, but he'd never acted on his threats to harm a young child. It's unlikely he would have known about the children before pulling Kathy over, so perhaps his plans changed at the last minute, and he didn't have the stomach to take a child's life. If the Zodiac was experiencing a crisis of conscience, it did not last. In April, his letter resumed, now claiming 10 victims but not stating who or where they were. He included another cipher that was too short for anyone to crack. These letters had started to become more rambling and incoherent, with claims that the killer could not back up. His demands also became bizarre. In a letter dated April 28th, he asked the Khronicle to publish drawings he made for a bomb, which experts determined would not even work, and asked everyone in the Bay Area to wear Zodiac pins. It seems that the killer, who once seemed calm and had everything in control, was starting to fade, turning into a delusional madman slipping away from reality. On June 26th, the Zodiac claimed responsibility for the shooting of 25-year-old SFPD officer Richard Radatic, a murder that had dominated headlines that month, but the police already had a suspect who they later proved to be the actual killer. Clearly, the Zodiac was trying to claim crimes he saw in the media that the police knew he did not commit. That threw into doubt any claims he made for numbers of victims or specific crimes from then on. The same letter also contained a cipher that supposedly led to the location of a bomb. The police never cracked it, and no bomb ever exploded. Another lie, and possibly another incompetently made cipher. It took until July 24th for the Zodiac to confirm a new actual crime, admitting to the attempted abduction of Kathy Johns in March. Given that the crime had not been publicized or publicly linked to him, and that the letter contained details known only to police, it proved he was telling the truth. It also proved to be the last crime that could be confirmed as the Zodiac's, but the list of possible crimes was only going to grow. By October, Zodiac's letters were now claiming 13 victims, but the police did not take these claims too seriously. One of the only people still paying close attention to the case was Chronicle reporter Peter Avery, who himself received a morbid Halloween card from the killer, threatening to murder him over his reporting. It was around this time that Avery received a new tip that would add a new twist to the Zodiac case. A member of the public wrote to him alleging that the Zodiac had begun his murders long before Betty Lou and David Faraday. A few months later, a poem was also found scrawled beneath a desk in the library where Bates was last seen, and presumably where the killer had been waiting before following her. The poem spoke of
blood spurting, dripping, spilling, all over her new dress. Oh well, it was red anyway.
On November 17, 1970, Avery published an article declaring that the Bates Riverside murder had been the Zodiac's work. If true, the Zodiac had been active far longer than anyone thought, and it raised the chances that he had other unclaimed victims exponentially. It took until March 1971 for the Zodiac to acknowledge the claim. Having grown bored of the Chronicle, he penned a letter to the LA Times instead.
I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity. But they are only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there.
The Riverside connection has been controversial ever since it was made. While some aspects of the case seem to align with the Zodiac's behavior, others do not. The Zodiac made no reference to the Riverside killing before Avery did. He did not mention it in any of his letters, did not include it on his list of kills on Billy Hartnell's door, or in his post-Stein murder letter, in which he specifically refers to the Vallejo murders as the ones he started with. Riverside police maintain that the Zodiac was not involved and the killer was a local man. In 2016, they announced that the culprit behind the letters had come forward and was confirmed by DNA evidence. A local man, a teenager at the time, had written them as a bad taste hoax. He was not the Zodiac Killer nor Bates murderer. Like the ever-rising number of unnamed victims and examples like the Officer Richter murder, it appears that the Zodiac was claiming whatever kills he saw in the headlines, even though he had nothing to do with them. The Zodiac's letters now seem to be more about staying in the headlines than revealing any actual truth. Interest in the killer began to fade. His decision to write to the LA Times about the Riverside case was, by his own admission, because Zodiac continued to write specifically to Avery with new claims, but none were ever verified. On March 22, 1971, he claimed 12 victims, down from the previous letters, and attached an advertisement for a Nevada holiday resort, but no evidence of the Zodiac's involvement in any crime in the area was found. That March 22nd letter proved to be the last one sent for almost 3 years. Afterwards, the Zodiac vanished and no one knows why. There are those who believe that he continued killing but lived up to his promise of not announcing them. Given that there were hundreds of unsolved homicides and disappearances in that time, the possibility cannot be ruled out. Others speculate he moved away for a time, or perhaps he truly did just stop killing. It wasn't until January 1974 that the Chronicle received another letter in that infamous handwriting with the signature excess postage and ordered to rush to the editor. The short letter opened with a brief review of the movie The Exorcist and ordered the paper to publish his letter. Me signed it off with a new total. Again, the Zodiac offered no proof to this new number, and police had no reason to connect him to any unsolved cases. Several more letters arrived through 1974, but they added nothing to the case. It took until April 24, 1978, for him to return again. It was immediately recognized with its distinct handwriting and twice the necessary postage.
Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. I am back with you. I have always been here. That city pig Toshi is good, but I am started, and better he will get tired than leave me alone. I am waiting for a good movie about me. Who will play me? I am now in control of all things.
This vague and unhelpful letter was authentic but not helpful. SFPD had long tired of Zodiac's games, as had the general public, who barely reacted to his reappearance. Moreover, it seemed Zodiac tired of the game as well. The 1978 letter was the last thing anyone ever heard from the Zodiac. While 1,000 different stories about who he was or why he did it have emerged, and 1,000 more false tips and outlandish stories claiming to prove the killer's identity have come up, not a single one has ever been proven. As of 2025, no one has been formally charged with the murders, and it is unlikely the case will ever be solved. The frustrating lack of answers on the Zodiac case has kept him in the headlines long after his murders ended. His unknown identity, his mysterious ciphers, and the horrifying possibility that he killed far more than authorities admit have turned him into one of America's most infamous criminals. He was not the most prolific serial killer as far as we can tell, nor the most brutal, nor the longest active, but he remains one of the most mysterious and captivating. The Zodiac murders are long over, but the Zodiac mystery endures, and is unlikely to be solved anytime soon.